"Ma'am, please step away from the lawn gnome, or I'll be forced to disarm you." Claire stood perfectly still, gardening gloves on, pruning shears in one hand, a fresh tray of muffins in the other. The HOA security patrol, a retiree in camo pants and a fishing hat, had his hand hovering over a can of pepper spray like he was at war with her begonias. I watched from the porch, biting my lip to keep from laughing. If only this guy knew the woman he was threatening used to teach Navy SEALs how to dismantle explosive devices in enemy territory while under fire. But sure, go ahead and square up over a ceramic gnome. When we moved into this quiet little cul-de-sac, we thought we were buying peace. I had just retired early from my IT consulting job, and Claire, who had completed her final contract with the Navy 2 years earlier, was finally ready to enjoy civilian life. She'd been deployed overseas more times than I could count, trained elite operatives in weapons systems and survival tactics, and walked away with nothing but a few medals, a hardened glare, and a love for baking that somehow blossomed after years in the field. Her goal now? To tend a vegetable garden, perfect her lemon bars, and forget what MREs tasted like. Enter the HOA. We were in our home less than a week before they pounced. A woman named Karen, yes, her real name, showed up with a faux-friendly smile and a binder that looked like it could hold nuclear codes. She introduced herself as the Neighborhood Enrichment Executive Coordinator, which I later learned was HOA speak for tyrant with a clipboard. Claire politely invited her in for tea. Karen declined and instead handed her a stack of papers so thick it could be used to brace a wobbly table. Claire flipped through them, expression unreadable. I caught sight of one page that mentioned the minimum distance ratio for mailbox cheerfulness. That's when I first saw it, Karen's glance. Not a friendly, neighborly look. It was the slow, dismissive squint of someone sizing Claire up and finding her wanting. "Oh, you don't work, then?" Karen asked, glancing at Claire's apron. "Just a housewife?" I held my breath, waiting for the flash of combat instinct or the dry sarcasm Claire reserved for cocky lieutenant. But she simply smiled, nodded, and said, "Something like that?" I knew right then Karen had made a critical mistake. She thought Claire was harmless. The next few days were sprinkled with passive-aggressive note. First it was the garbage bins. Ours were placed 2 inches too far from the curb. Then it was the American flag Claire had hanging from the porch. "Too large for aesthetic harmony," the notice read. Claire chuckled and replaced it with a flag twice the size, one with a bald eagle holding a slice of apple pie. Karen didn't respond well. By the time week 3 rolled around, citations were flying in like Claire's homemade biscuits on chilly night. Overly aggressive garage door color, wind chime violations, and my favorite, lawn furniture that suggests a combative tone. The HOA apparently had a beef with the Adirondack chairs I'd stained navy blue. Claire shrugged each off with a smirk, but I could tell something had shifted. Things took a strange turn when we received an official summons to attend the upcoming HOA meeting. The letter was phrased like a court order and stamped with what looked like a homemade seal of authority. I tried to joke about it, said we should bring popcorn and wear matching t-shirts that said, "Just a housewife and her supportive tech nerd." Claire didn't laugh. She was quiet that night, staring at her hands, remembering something from long ago. That's the thing about her, she's all steel beneath the calm. On the day of the meeting, Karen had arranged the chairs in a circle like we were in a suburban cult. She opened the gathering by listing a few concerning patterns from new residents. Claire sat quietly, hands folded in her lap, as Karen monologued like she was trying to win a debate contest. "We're a community built on order," she droned. "And while we support diversity of background, some behaviors may not align with our vision." Claire nodded slowly. "Which behaviors, specifically?" Her tone was even. Karen smirked. "Well, for one, there's been reports of, how should I say this, unusual activity. Tactical drills in the backyard. Camo clothing. Shouting in a foreign language." Claire blinked. "That was me calling the dog in Norwegian. It's good for training." Karen kept pushing. And frankly, some of the women have expressed concern. You seem intense. Intimidating, even. And several said they feel unsafe around you. Claire turned her head slowly. Unsafe because I wore boots while planting tomatoes? A pause. Karen shifted her weight, clearly losing steam. Well, not just that. The posture. The presence. It's not exactly housewife material. That's when Claire stood up. Not fast, not dramatic. Just calmly, slowly, like someone who's handled far more dangerous situations than neighborhood gossip. She reached into her tote bag, pulled out a folded paper, and handed it to Karen. Karen unfolded it and read, her face paling by the second. It was Claire's commendation letter, signed by the Secretary of the Navy. Before you continue to lecture me about presents, Claire said, voice still soft, I'd like you to understand what exactly it is I bring to this neighborhood. Karen tried to speak but choked on her own confusion. Claire continued, You see a housewife. That's fine. I see a community that could use some actual safety training. God forbid anything real ever happens here. But if it does, you'll want me on your side. The room was dead silent. Even Mr. Jenkins, who never misses a chance to complain about leaf blowers, looked impressed. Karen mumbled something about reviewing community protocols and practically sprinted from the room. That night, as we sat on the porch drinking iced tea, Claire finally smiled. I think I'm gonna build a scarecrow, she said. Dress it up like a drill sergeant. See how long it takes them to file a complaint. I laughed. You sure you want to provoke them again? She shrugged. They started it. And just like that, I realized, peace and quiet might not be in our future, but watching Claire outmaneuver an entire HOA might be the most entertaining retirement plan we could have asked for. It started with the herbs. Claire had spent a full Saturday morning planting neat rows of rosemary, thyme, mint, and something called purple basil that I swear glowed when the sun hit it right. She was in her zone. Sun hat on, earbuds in, gently talking to the seedlings like she used to speak to new recruits. Calm, confident, and just threatening enough to encourage growth. That night, she even labeled everything with little wooden tags she'd hand-painted. I thought it was adorable. The HOA thought it was a declaration of war. At 7:42 a.m. the next morning, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find 2 HOA compliance assistants standing like mall cops on a caffeine bender. One held a laminated sheet labeled Unpermitted Landscaping Guide. The other had a measuring wheel and a clipboard. I kid you not. Claire walked out with her coffee and leaned against the porch rail, watching the men as if she were back at a checkpoint in Kandahar. They explained, with very serious faces, that Claire's garden violated Botanical Article 12C, which apparently forbade the growth of unauthorized flora within sight lines of communal walkways. Claire blinked once and asked, You mean the time? They both nodded grimly. Then she asked, Do you have any idea what you're doing? The one with the clipboard replied, Ma'am, we're just enforcing the community standards. Claire slowly took a sip of her coffee. Those standards better be in Geneva, she muttered, and walked back inside. I thought that would be the end of it. Claire didn't. She knew escalation when she saw it. Sure enough, 2 days later, we came home from the grocery store to find the garden trampled. Plants were uprooted, stakes broken, and one of the little herb markers had been snapped clean in half. Claire crouched beside the ruined mint and stared at it for a long time. I knelt next to her, ready to offer comfort, but she held up a hand. Don't, she said softly. They wanted a reaction. I'll give them one. On my terms. What followed was nothing short of artistry. Claire began a campaign, not of revenge, but of subtle, surgical retaliation. First came the scarecrow. True to her word, she built one and dressed it in an actual Navy training uniform she had stored in a trunk. Sunglasses, beret, and combat boots completed the look. She named him Captain Sprout. He stood proudly in the front yard, arms crossed, with a sign around his neck that read, Security Overseer. Do not approach without clearance. The neighbors were bewildered. Karen was livid. Then Claire started getting creative. She set up a chalkboard on our lawn titled Daily Tactical Tip, and wrote a new one each morning. Some were innocent: always sweep your 6. Others? Not so much. Remove the safety after visual confirmation. Got Karen so upset she called a town hall meeting. Claire didn't show. Instead, she sent over a plate of lemon bars and a note. Engaged in perimeter monitoring. Good luck. That was when Karen retaliated with her boldest move yet, installing a camera aimed directly into our living room window. She claimed it was to ensure community safety, but the angle was so deliberate it was basically a live broadcast of our couch. I was furious, but Claire just stared at it for a few seconds, then vanished into the garage. An hour later, she returned with a pair of aviator glasses, her old Navy gear, and a whiteboard. That evening, while I cooked dinner, Claire stood in full combat stance in front of the window, going through tactical stretches while holding up notes like, "Nice try, Karen," and "Next move, infrared." The next morning, a local cop showed up. I opened the door and nearly burst out laughing. It was Officer Lewis, one of Claire's former trainees. He'd recognized her immediately on the call dispatch. "She really set up a surveillance cam?" he asked. Claire nodded and handed him a USB stick with footage showing the camera clearly violating privacy laws. Lewis shook his head. "She has no idea who she's messing with." The camera came down within 24 hours. But Karen wasn't done. She called for an emergency compliance review and demanded Claire present herself before the board. The letter had so many buzzwords: safety concern, combat gear, public distress. You'd think Claire had mounted a cannon on the lawn. I asked if she wanted me to go with her. Claire smiled and said, "No need. I brought cupcakes. That meeting will live in legend." Claire walked in wearing a soft yellow sweater, hair in a ponytail, makeup perfectly done, and carrying a tray of homemade red velvet cupcakes with tactical sprinkles on top, black and white sugar stars. She smiled sweetly, placed the tray on the table, and sat down with perfect posture. Karen launched into a tirade. Neighbors were concerned Claire's background was intimidating, and someone even claimed to hear shouting in a foreign language. Claire waited until the end, then calmly said, "That would be Norwegian. I trained our dog using Nordic commands. It's good for discipline." One of the board members, Mr. Reynolds, asked, "And what exactly did you do before moving here?" Claire smiled gently. "I taught close-quarter combat to elite military personnel, and weapons safety, and escape and evasion. Oh, and I also instructed a few FBI units in non-lethal incapacitation techniques." The silence in the room could have knocked over a lamp. Karen stuttered, "Well, surely you understand why your aura might make some people uncomfortable?" Claire tilted her head slightly. "You mean because I know how to protect myself and my home?" Karen flushed. "It's just, this is a peaceful neighborhood." Claire stood up slowly, placed a single cupcake in front of Karen, and said, "Then let's keep it that way." She turned and walked out without another word. The next day, 3 more neighbors introduced themselves and asked Claire for self-defense tip. Someone even dropped off a box of old throwing knives with a note. "Figured you'd know what to do with these." That evening, as we sat under the stars sipping tea, I looked at Claire and said, "Do you think she'll stop now?" Claire shrugged. "Not yet. Karen's not the type to surrender. But she'll make a mistake. And when she does, I'll be ready." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise, soft, measured, and somehow more dangerous than anything Karen could ever conjure. Karen wasn't just angry now, she was obsessed. After the cupcake humiliation and the polite takedown at the compliance meeting, something inside her clearly snapped. Claire had embarrassed her, outclassed her, and worst of all, hadn't even broken a sweat doing it. For someone like Karen, who thrived on dominance through rules and paranoia, that was unforgivable. So, naturally, she did what any passive-aggressive suburban overlord with too much time and too little self-awareness would do: she started digging. Claire knew it the moment our mailbox got opened and resealed with tape that wasn't ours. At first, I thought it was the wind or maybe a nosy kid, but she recognized the signs instantly. "This is amateur reconnaissance," she said, inspecting the slight tear in the corner of a letter. Sloppy fingers, didn't even recrease the envelope properly. I just blinked at her. She'd been out of the field for years, but every now and then, I saw glimpses of the instructor she used to be, sharp, detail-oriented, and always 10 moves ahead. That same week, strange things began happening. A man in a gray hoodie walked past our house 3 times in one day, pausing just a bit too long each time. A drone hovered over our backyard for 30 seconds before buzzing off. One morning, our dog, usually calm, growled at a bush near the fence, and Claire found a crumpled note tucked inside. "We know who you are." It was typed, unsigned, and printed on cheap office paper. Claire stared at it for a moment, then calmly lit it on fire and dropped the ashes into the trash. I asked her if we should call someone. She just smiled. "Why waste resources when I have better friends?" The next few days were quiet, at least on the surface. Claire didn't say much. She spent more time in the garage, fiddling with equipment I didn't recognize. One night I peeked in and found her cleaning an old tactical camera setup she hadn't used in years. She looked up at me and said, "If she wants a show, I'll give her one." Karen's next stunt was almost cartoonish. She sent out a community newsletter, hand-delivered to each resident, with a section titled "Profiles in Neighborhood Watchfulness." The whole piece was a thinly veiled attack on Claire. Phrases like aggressively secretive newcomers, possible paramilitary influence, and residents who may pose a threat to HOA cohesion were scattered throughout the paragraph like little time bombs of slander. They didn't name Claire directly, but the description, a woman known for wearing boots, using coded language, and intimidating HOA volunteers, wasn't exactly subtle. What Karen didn't count on was the neighborhood actually liking Claire. People started coming up to us more. Some were curious, others amused, but a few were angry on Claire's behalf. One woman whispered, "Karen's gone too far. If she targeted me like that, I'd lose it." Another neighbor, whose teenage son Claire had helped prepare for a ROTC interview, dropped off a pie and muttered, "For your nerves. Or for launching at someone, your choice." Word was getting around, and it wasn't going the way Karen hoped. Still, Claire didn't retaliate publicly. Instead, she waited for the HOA's next big event, their beloved annual Neighborhood Safety Fair. It was always a self-congratulatory spectacle with booths on fire extinguisher use, pamphlets about home security, and a raffle for a free set of walkie-talkies no one ever used. This year, Karen decided to spice things up by including a basic self-defense demonstration. She'd hired an instructor from a local gym who'd never dealt with anything more threatening than a treadmill mishap. Claire raised an eyebrow when she saw the flyer. "Think they'd mind if I attend?" I tried to say something cautious, but she was already in the closet, selecting workout gear with the same care most people use to pick wedding outfit. The day of the fair was perfect. Bright skies, smiling families, barbecue smells wafting through the cul-de-sac. Claire wore a simple black t-shirt and jeans, her hair in a braid. She looked completely non-threatening until she moved. There's something about her walk when she's focused. It's subtle, but anyone with real training would notice. Precise steps, centered balance, constant awareness. The fake instructor definitely didn't notice. About 20 people gathered for the demo, including Karen in a lemon-colored blouse that looked like it was angry just being on her body. The gym guy introduced himself and began going through awkwardly rehearsed moves, using a teenage volunteer as a mugger. Claire stood at the back with her arms crossed, not saying a word. But the instructor was clearly struggling. His explanations were vague, his grip positions wrong. A few people started whispering. Then the kid tripped during a move, and the instructor snapped, "You're useless. Anyone else want to try? You, housewife lady, how about you?" Claire looked at him and smiled. Then she stepped forward. "Sure," she said calmly. "I'll play." What followed was, without exaggeration, the most impressive and hilarious takedown I've ever witnessed. Claire let the guy walk her through a wrist escape move, then casually reversed it, and had him on the ground in 3 seconds flat. She helped him up with a smile and said, "Want to try a defense from behind?" He hesitated, then nodded, and before he could blink, she had gently disarmed him of his demonstration knife and pinned him without even wrinkling her shirt. The crowd erupted in stunned silence, then laughter, then applause. Karen, red as a beet, stormed away muttering something about insurance liability. Later that evening, as we sat in the backyard with tiki torches flickering and Claire casually cleaning under her nails, she said, "She's getting desperate now. I think she's about to make a real mistake." "What kind of mistake?" I asked. Claire didn't answer right away. She just looked at the horizon and said, "The kind you can't undo with a newsletter." And just like that, I realized the game Karen had been playing wasn't one Claire was in anymore. Claire had already moved on to a different battlefield, one where the rules were hers, and the HOA had no idea they'd already lost. Karen's mistake came quicker than even Claire expected. After the safety fair fiasco, you'd think a reasonable person would have backed off, maybe taken a vacation or at least focused on something more productive, like macrame or therapy. But Karen wasn't wired that way. Losing control wasn't just inconvenient for her, it was existential. The more she lost grip on the neighborhood, the harder she squeezed, and like all things under pressure, something had to crack. And what cracked was Karen's sense of what was legal. The notice came late on a Thursday evening, hand-delivered and smugly sealed in an envelope with a wax stamp like she thought she was running a royal court instead of a suburban committee. Claire opened it, scanned the contents, and handed it to me without a word. It read, "Due to repeated violations of community decorum and a general atmosphere of intimidation, the HOA is formally initiating legal proceedings against Claire, last name for public misconduct, emotional distress caused to neighbors, and unauthorized demonstration of tactical maneuvers in a family setting." I read it twice, then once more out loud, just to be sure I wasn't hallucinating. Claire, who was slicing strawberries for a tart, didn't flinch. "You okay?" I asked. She picked up another berry. "She's panicking." "That's good. People make mistakes when they panic." Karen had officially filed a civil complaint. She hired a local lawyer who, from what Claire's connections could tell, was mostly known for handling noisy pet disputes and the occasional HOA turf war. But the lawsuit wasn't the real issue, it was the smear campaign that followed. Karen printed copies of the complaint and accidentally left them in the community clubhouse, the laundry room of the shared pool facility, and even inside several neighborhood mailboxes. It was a desperate, reckless move, and completely illegal. Claire made one phone call. That's all it took. Her friend Monica, a legal bulldog and former JAG officer, took one look at the paperwork and laughed so hard she nearly dropped her wine. "Oh, we're going to bury her," Monica said. "Do you want me to use your credentials or mine?" Claire shrugged. "Both," she said. "Let's make it fun." The countersuit was a masterpiece, 32 pages long, citing misuse of private information, defamation, HOA fund misappropriation, and invasion of privacy. Monica filed it within 48 hours, and just like that, Karen found herself playing defense in a courtroom far above her league. But Claire wasn't done. While Monica handled the legal side, Claire focused on the HOA itself. The internal structure was a mess. Karen had been running things like a dictator with a stapler. Claire had quietly been collecting testimonies, emails, photos, even video footage from residents who were sick of Karen's regime. One neighbor had a recording of Karen instructing her to fabricate violations against another resident just because she didn't like their Halloween decorations. Another had proof that Karen had spent community funds on personal security equipment, including motion sensors installed under the guise of community upgrades, but placed only around her property. Claire compiled everything into a single digital presentation. But before unleashing it, she dropped a breadcrumb to someone unexpected, Mr. Wexler, the HOA treasurer. A retired accountant with a fondness for crossword puzzles and quiet lawns, Wexler had never really liked Karen but tolerated her for the sake of peace. That changed once he saw the numbers. Claire showed him the discrepancies in the budget. Purchases with no receipts, security fees that didn't match actual installations, payments to vendors that didn't exist. His eyes went wide. She's laundering HOA money through fake yard service companies? Claire nodded. And using the rest for personal tech. Want to help fix it? Wexler, to his credit, didn't hesitate. The man launched a full internal audit that same night, and by the end of the week, 3 other board members resigned. That left Karen, red-faced and cornered, clinging to a sinking ship. Then came the armory. Claire had heard whispers from 2 different sources, one a neighbor kid who liked to snoop, the other a former friend of Karen's who had finally had enough. Apparently, Karen's husband, a prepper type with more ambition than brains, had turned their basement into a self-styled community readiness center. The problem? Most of what he was storing wasn't legal for civilian stockpiling. Claire tipped off an old contact from the ATF. Quietly. Discreetly. The kind of call that doesn't show up in official logs but gets the right attention. The day of the final HOA meeting arrived like a storm cloud ready to burst. It was set in the community hall, and everyone knew something big was coming. The room was packed. Claire walked in with a small USB drive and a stack of printed documents. Karen was already there, jittery and flanked by her increasingly nervous husband. The air was electric, like everyone was waiting for a movie to start, but no one knew what genre it would be. Karen stood and launched into a speech, long, whiny, and full of self-righteous buzzwords. She accused Claire of destabilizing the neighborhood, bullying residents, even threatening to overthrow the HOA. Claire didn't interrupt. She let her talk. When Karen finally finished, Claire stepped forward, plugged the USB into the projector, and calmly said, "Let's clarify a few things." The presentation was flawless. First, the emails showing Karen forging HOA violations. Then the budget slides, exposing fraudulent spending. Then the videos. Camera footage of Karen's goons tearing up Claire's garden, surveillance showing Karen installing the illegal camera, and finally, a financial map connecting Karen to a fake landscaping company registered in her cousin's name. The final slide? A live feed from a news helicopter hovering over the community, where ATF agents were currently serving a warrant at Karen's house. The room erupted. Karen tried to scream about privacy, slander, anything, but it was over. The HOA voted to remove her immediately. Her husband tried to leave but was intercepted by agents in windbreakers outside. And Claire? She sat back down, crossed her legs, and popped a butterscotch candy in her mouth like she'd just finished a crossword puzzle, not orchestrated a takedown worthy of a military tribunal. That night, the neighborhood felt lighter. People waved more. Someone brought over a bottle of wine. Even the notoriously grumpy old man on the corner smiled and said, "Damn fine work." Claire simply nodded. Just trying to keep things safe. And she meant it. Because for Claire, safety wasn't just about alarms and fences. It was about truth, balance, and making sure no one ever used fear to control others again. Not in her neighborhood. Not on her watch. Karen's house sat in silence now, the once meticulously pruned hedges growing just a little wilder, the porch light flickering without repair, and the neighborhood watch sign half tilted in the yard like a forgotten prop from a play that had ended in disaster. Her car hadn't moved in 3 days. The ATF investigation was in full swing, and while no one was broadcasting updates, the agent's occasional presence and the now boarded-up basement window said enough. Karen was finished, both publicly and privately, and the HOA she once ruled with a color-coded binder and passive-aggressive emails was now undergoing a full transformation. Claire didn't celebrate. Not in any obvious way. There was no victory lap, no smug looks, no gloating. She kept tending her garden, chatting with neighbors, baking her absurdly good scones, and politely declining the stream of invitations to join the new HOA board. Everyone wanted her to lead, but she shook her head each time with the same quiet smile and the same answer: "I'm here to rest, not reign." Still, her influence was undeniable. People referred to her as the person who saved the neighborhood, and they weren't exaggerating. Even Mr. Wexler, now the interim president of the HOA, often stopped by just to ask her opinion before major decisions. Then came the day she got the offer. A black SUV pulled up in front of our house late one morning while I was working in the garage. A man and a woman in suits stepped out, not too flashy, but not local either. I knew the look. Federal, clean shoes, subtle posture. Claire walked out to greet them with a calm expression and a tea towel in her hand. They spoke quietly on the porch for a few minutes. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I recognized the respectful nods, the occasional half-smile. When they left, she came inside and placed a small card on the kitchen counter with a government seal embossed on it. "They want me to consult," she said, opening the fridge for a bottle of water. "Civilian Tactical Strategy Workshop. Short term. Flexible schedule. Good pay." I raised an eyebrow. "You going back?" She shook her head. "Not full-time. But they need someone who knows how to deal with threats that don't announce themselves. And I like the idea of teaching people how to handle real situations, not the fake drama Karen invented." It was poetic in its own way. Claire had been dragged into chaos by someone who thought controlling people was power, and now she was being invited to use her real experience to teach others how to stop that kind of abuse before it started. She didn't brag about it, didn't even bring it up again. She just made another pie that night and dropped off slices at 3 of the neighbors who'd stood by her during the madness. Karen, meanwhile, was facing a full audit. Her husband was charged with multiple counts of illegal storage of explosives, misuse of HOA funds, and obstruction. The ATF agents had discovered stockpiled fireworks, smoke grenades, and more pepper spray than any reasonable person should own. It turned out their little community readiness center had been meant to act as a private enforcement hub. They'd planned to form their own mini-police force, complete with uniforms and neighborhood patrol schedules. What started as an overreach had turned into something out of a low-budget action movie, and Karen had truly believed no one would stop her. Now, her former allies avoided her house like it was radioactive. Her closest board members had turned witness, her cousin's fake landscaping business had been exposed, and her name was removed from every community document with the same quiet precision Claire had used to dismantle her entire power structure. She hadn't been seen in days. Some said she'd left town. Others claimed she was still inside, hiding behind blackout curtains and stacks of old HOA files. But the neighborhood had moved on. A week later, the new HOA hosted a block party. It was informal, friendly, and free of laminated flyers or absurd dress code. Kids ran through sprinklers, grills sizzled with hot dogs, and folding tables groaned under the weight of casseroles and cookies. Claire brought deviled eggs and her tactical potato salad, a running joke now, since one neighbor swore he gained 5 pounds just looking at it. She wore a sundress, laughed at someone's dad jokes, and even led a simple self-defense demonstration for the teens, showing them how to break a wrist grip without actually hurting anyone. At one point, a new family approached her. The father, tall and soft-spoken, looked vaguely familiar. He introduced himself as Mark, a recent transfer from another state. His wife was cheerful, and their 2 kids were already making friends with the others on the lawn. After a few pleasantries, Mark leaned in and said quietly, "I heard about what happened here. Impressive work. I used to fly stealth in the Air Force. We should swap notes sometime." Claire smiled in that way she does when she's already 5 steps ahead. "You have no idea how much I'd enjoy that." The party carried on well into the evening, with string lights overhead and the hum of laughter filling the air. It felt like the neighborhood had shed its skin, sloughed off all the tension and fear Karen had wrapped around it. People were relaxed again, not worried about citations or judgment. Someone even started a group chat named Karen Free Zone, and it quickly filled with garden tips, dog photos, and memes about homeowner drama. Later that night, as Claire and I sat on the porch sipping iced tea, I glanced at her and said, "So, are we officially safe now?" She didn't answer right away. She looked up at the sky, then down at the garden she'd replanted, now thriving, with the scarecrow still standing proud among the vegetables. Finally, she said, "As safe as we can be. But that's the thing about safety. It's not a place you reach. It's something you protect." I nodded. "And you're still protecting us?" She looked at me sideways with a small smile. "Always." And with that, we sat in peaceful silence, the kind that comes not from isolation or hiding but from knowing that even in a quiet neighborhood, the best kind of peace is the one you've earned, defended, and shared. Not with fear. Not with force. But with the calm confidence of someone who's faced chaos and come out stronger, not in spite of it, but because of it.